Hello everyone. My name is Andrea Krosnay, and I'm a digital learning associate here at eCampus Ontario, and I'm spearheading our francophone experiential learning program. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about experiential learning in the franco-ontarian minority context and how we leverage open education to help our members develop the next generation of bilingual and francophone talent. And before we launch into our presentation, though, I would like to start by a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to begin by honoring and acknowledging that the offices of eCampus Ontario are located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I join you today from London, Ontario. So not London, England, but London, Ontario here in Canada, which is situated on the territories of Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Atawandaron. I recognize and am grateful for the legacy of all past, present, and future generations of the first people of this land. And I invite you all to share your land acknowledgement in the chat as well. We'll have a link for you as well if you need any help with that as well. So without further ado, here's an agenda to kind of give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about today. So a little bit of context about what eCampus Ontario is and what specifically CAPFO is to lay that foundation of the context of what we're talking about in open education. I wanted to get a common shared understanding of work integrated learning as well and how OERs relate to that. So that'll be the second part of what we're going to be talking about today. And then I'll have the pleasure of talking to you about our two OERs that we created last year, one of which is based on a study that I've conducted in April-May on experiential learning in the specific context of Franco-Ontario. And then finally, also a link that I've made between education and employability and how OERs can help us identify skills and to fill that skill gap through micro-credentials. And finally, of course, but certainly not least, you'll have an opportunity to ask me some questions as well. So eCampus Ontario, we're a nonprofit organization established in 2015 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And we lead a consortium of colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes in higher education. And our goal is to help them use education technology, aid them with their digital transformation initiatives, and basically everything online learning / ed tech. And in this large umbrella that is eCampus Ontario, there is a smaller bubble, I would say, that's called CAPFO, which roughly translates to the Consortium of Francophone Experiential Learning of Ontario. And these are 7 members that are Francophone colleges and bilingual and Francophone universities. And now you might ask, well, why do you have a Francophone specific experiential learning consortium? And my answer to that is, well, our goal is to support our members and filling in what is a gap in creating experiential learning opportunities that are available in either French language or in a bilingual environment. So for those who might not know, Francophones in Ontario represent the largest Francophone minority in Canada. So that's where we kind of come in to fill in that gap. So now that we have a little bit of context of what CAPFO is, what eCampus Ontario is, I wanted to get a common shared understanding of experiential learning and work integrated learning. So experiential learning as defined by Kolb is going through these 4 phases that are part of an iterative process. So you start with phase 1, which is at the top here, an experimentation phase, during which students engage in concrete experiences, after which they reflect upon those experiences in the second phase. But in the third phase, they start by emitting hypotheses on what they've reflected and what they've experienced to finally apply these hypotheses in the next phase, or going back to the iterative phase of experimentation. So that's the large umbrella of experiential learning in a nutshell. Whereas work integrated learning goes in a little bit more specific than that, meaning that there always needs to be, for example, a partnership between an institution and a student and an employer, with the purpose of achieving certain objectives related to employability, skills, knowledge, lifelong learning, things like that. So it can be part of a course or part of a program as well. And if we switch gears and we get a common shared understanding about what an OER is, well, it could be so many things. It doesn't necessarily have to be a PDF sort of copy paste from real life books to a digital format, but it could be a podcast, it could be a simulation. So there's many ways to enrich work integrated learning and experiential learning through the means of OERs. And I think that versatility of OERs will help educators create the necessary resources to bridge that gap in the francophone and bilingual work integrated learning sphere. And I spoke to our lovely team and the Open Library team, and they had shared some information with me. And so I really wanted to highlight this as well, is that there are 3 key parts that we're taking in consideration when we're working with this francophone linguistic minority, that this really helps us open access and experiential learning. So OERs are free of cost, free of barriers, and free to use. So it allows educators to adapt and reuse materials that they create within the community. So WIL meets OER. I think most of us kind of know that, work integrated learning is not a new concept. In traditional career pathways, it's an integral component of the curriculum pedagogy. And what we're seeing in higher education is that there's a strong focus in incorporating experiential learning components and work integrated learning in all programs to bridge that gap between education and industry or / the workplace. So that begs the question, well, how do we make work integrated learning accessible, and most particularly in a language minority context? And I will add some context to say, most support systems are predominantly in English, which presents a structural inequality. And I think that's where OERs and open education in general is one of those methods that we can use to dismantle these barriers. So this is net new work in some areas. Like I mentioned, there are traditional areas where work integrated learning is deeply embedded in how things have always been done. Whereas in other areas, we're seeing that this is net new work. So if we're creating these resources, well, we might as well create them with open access and address the equity issue at the very start. And for our educator community, it allows them to collaborate and use their strengths together to build upon this project together, rather than everyone sort of not being aligned and pulling in different directions and creating the same resources simultaneously. So there's that. Also, lastly, I would say that spirit of collaboration to help build together and unite forces and amplify their strengths. So now with all of this in mind, so the context that we're in, the perspective of WIL meets OER, I've created a couple of bilingual OERs. So there's 4 in total. So there's one French and English equivalent of each. Here you're able to download the English version either by using that QR code, or my lovely colleague Taylor will be throwing in a link in the chat shortly if she hasn't already done so. I'm not able to see the chat. So thank you again, Taylor, for helping with that. And this is the most recent OER that we've launched within the CAPFO program. And one of the equity issues that really helps address is the lack of information of around experiential learning within this specific group. So I'll go over briefly some of the trends and challenges and how this ties into open education for us. So a little bit of context around the study. It was conducted in April, May, as I mentioned before. We used a mixed methods approach. So there were some multiple choice questions and some short answer questions. We were looking to find the trends and challenges facing the Franco-Ontarian community in post-secondary education when we're talking about experiential learning and work integrated learning. We had 29% respondents from colleges and 71% universities, which funny enough, within the CAPFO membership, that's the exact representation that we also have. So we have 29% colleges and 71% university. So it was a great sample to work with. And if I didn't mention this before, we had 14 respondents, and of which we also wanted to see, well, we know where these stakeholders are coming from, but also who are they? So below you'll see the stakeholder proportions as well. So these are self-identified. We had 36% in leadership roles, 50% in management or support staff roles. And excuse me, lastly, we had 14% academic or staff roles. Some of the trends and challenges that we've identified are kind of interrelated and rather interesting. So on the left here, you have trends. There is a growing support and interest for experiential learning and work-integrated learning. But on the right hand, you have a lack of infrastructure and framework for implementation. On the left, again, post-secondary institutions are beginning to experiment with experiential learning and work-integrated learning applications. So this might be a tool, this might be an evaluation method. But on the right-hand side, you'll see that this specific group had an extra layer of challenges in implementation. Generally, let's say like a language barrier, or the resource itself was not available in French. So there's always that additional step that they would have to take. And last but certainly not least, research was conducted on when it would make sense and how it would make sense for the experiential learning applications to be used to enhance learning. However, on the right-hand side, you will see that the challenge was that the faculty engagement was low, and they would play a key role in creating those experiential learning experiences. So if I were to pause here and just look at this, what we found in this report, well, if we're lacking some OERs to support these educators, then that might be a good start. They can co-create the engagement that we do see from faculty. We're able to transpose and translate that information into an OER to help better prepare educators to engage. Since it's a chicken or the egg situation, I think a little bit, where you're trying to create something new, you're trying to innovate, but then you don't know where to start. And then there's a group of people who have started, so translating that information into an OER to help the other individuals who might be stuck somewhere is one, I think, way to improve that lack of infrastructure and to improve that support for this specific community. So I'm just checking here the time. So we have 15 minutes left, and I do want to make sure I have time for questions. So I might invite you all to delve into this a little bit deeper at your own leisure. And if you haven't had a chance to download that link, I think it's in the chat as well. So or that QR code, it's in the chat as well. But I wanted to highlight a little bit of on the side of solutions, again, to highlight the relation to open education. So what we found as solutions, based on what we found in the research, is that aside of the direct funding to institutions to help administratively support experiential learning and work-integrated learning, we also found that there is a need for creating a common framework and reference in French around the terminology in experiential learning. And this is not only in experiential learning, because you'll see this in open education as well, and any sort of innovative education work. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this struggle where we might be talking about the same thing, but we're just calling it something really, really different. So that we found was something that would be able to be transposed into an OER. And additionally to that, not only the language barriers, but also, even if you're speaking in the same language, industry to education partner relations. There's also a language barrier there where we might be talking about the same thing, but the jargon is very, very different. For example, when I would talk about work-integrated learning when an educator, they're understanding what I've showed you in terms of definitions. But when I talk about work-integrated learning with an employer, their perception might be the professional development that employees undergo while they're on the job. So we're talking the same words, same language, but the notion and the understanding is slightly different. And last but certainly not least, providing educators with professional development opportunities. Well, like I've said before, OERs would be, I think, a great means to build the structures to collaborate for a common language framework and help support each other, again, where a lot of resources might be a little bit more limited. So this is the second OER that we've created within the CAPFO program. And what we were looking to do here is create a framework for educators to be able to evaluate experiences. So we'll also have a QR code here and then a link in the chat as well. And I'll quickly graze over this OER for the interest of time. The first page that you saw there was context that I've already provided you in this presentation, but I think that the second piece is where it really gets interesting. So imagine this summary of employability skills, which was proposed by the University Agency of Francophonie, if I roughly translate it. But imagine this table as a filter for employability skills. So now you could take any experience that's either been embedded in a program or a course or is a standalone experiential learning experience, and you're filtering these employability skills of students to see, well, they've done really well in arithmetic, or they've done really well in public speaking. And now, if you have a framework where you can evaluate certain skills, well, you can take a next step further. And we talk about this a lot at eCampusOntario, where you can target specific skills so that you can begin a process of micro-certification or micro-credentialing. So you can start targeting certain skills in experiential learning opportunities to create a micro-credential that is then recognized by employers and provides students with a chance to upskill or reskill depending on what their career trajectory is. So the aim of this OER was really to make this information accessible and an easy guide to use for educators who wanted to start but didn't know where. There was a lot of feedback that I was getting about that. So that was the main idea behind this OER. And I invite you to visit our eCampusOntario website if you're interested in learning more about micro-credentials. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention before I let you all go and we go into the question period, is we have a CAPFO newsletter. Now, I recognize it's fully in French, but I challenge you to use maybe machine learning or learn a few words by signing up for our newsletter. You will be kept in touch about all things experiential learning, francophonie, and there's a lot of open education topics that we cover there as well. And it's a monthly based newsletter. And then my second invitation to you before we head on to the question period is to connect with me on LinkedIn, either via the QR code that you have there, or you also are able to search my name as well. And lastly, you could also connect with me by email at fr@ecampusontario.ca. I know I jumped through all that really quickly, so please do not hesitate to either unmute your mic or pose any questions you might have in the chat as well. Thank you.
So Andrea, we do actually have a couple questions in the Q&A, so I'm gonna copy it into the chat for you so that you can read it, and then maybe you can start there.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So the question here that I have is, do you project that in lieu of challenges finding specific information from vast amount of OER material out there, that integrating AI has potential to address the issue and challenge? That is a very interesting question, and there's a lot there. So I'll try to maybe piece it apart, and feel free to either jump back into the chat to flesh it out more, or let me know via your microphone as well. I think AI would be very interesting in experiential learning, and it could definitely be another support. And I'll give you a great example. If you are engaging in language learning alone and you wanted to practice your language skills, you could use AI for that. You can jump on to ChatGPT and start to write in different languages, for example, and it will respond to you. So if you don't have a study buddy or someone to practice your linguistic skills with, well, that's a great way to leverage AI for the purposes of experiential learning. I think it also could be used in tandem. So there's a component in an OER that provides you some sort of, let's say, guideline on an experiential learning project, and then it advises you how you can use AI to enhance the learning as well. I think there's so many ways to answer this question, but I would love to know if I'm answering it or if there's something that I'm missing. Maybe there's a different angle or perspective that I haven't looked at here.
The question, Kevin here, the question I know is broad, but I was just seeking, there may be a bridge, a good opportunity, I think, to integrate AI to address the problem of finding specific information. I think there's a potential for that.
100%. And I think that, we've come a very long way with machine translation. It's by no means perfect. It's always the hot topic between myself and my bilingual colleagues on the accuracy, especially when you delve into very specific niche information. There's still a little bit of work on that front, but I think I can speak for myself. I've been really, really impressed recently with what they have been able to do with machine translation. So I do foresee that as well as being a great means to increase accessibility as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And I actually have another question from our Q&A. Actually, I have two more. So I'm sending the next one your way.
Work integrated learning appears parallel to interprofessional education, intercollaborative practice approaches, initiatives. Thoughts on this? I think if I'm understanding this correctly, it's sort of what I have alluded to, that in the industry partners world, work integrated learning is more of a professional education pathway sort of connotation around it. So what you're learning on the job and as you're being what's it called? I'm thinking in French. As you're being taught on the job and you're receiving additional trainings, well, that is work integrated learning as well, I would say. Per se, if we're focusing very much on the language in those words. However, if we step back and we look at the definition of work integrated learning, and that's why I like to go back to that definition, it still defines as it has to contain a partnership between an employer, a institution, so an education post-secondary institution in this case, and a student. So you could say, well, if you're taking, let's say, a certificate in leadership or a certificate in project management while you're working, that could be a form of work integrated learning as well. And I think we're seeing a lot of that as well in general in the workplace nowadays.
I don't know if there's any follow-up for that question, or if not, there is one more in the Q&A section, so I can send that your way if there's no follow-up. We're all good?
Good to go.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. All right, and Andrea, I've sent that last question for you.
So can we have access to the employability skills to bridge the education and industry? I'm not sure if it's asking the OER or if it's asking if employability skills are the means to bridge between education and industry, but I think it might be the latter. In which case I think it is possible and we do have access. And I think that it's just a matter of creating the infrastructure to support that. Like I said, there's traditional career pathways, like let's say accounting, where the programs generally already have co-ops embedded into their programs. So that's a great way of ensuring, well, the students are learning XYZ skills. These are really crucial for this domain or this industry. And this is what they need to achieve. These are the learning outcomes they need to achieve by the end of their program. So I think that now we're shifting gears and we're trying to get really creative to find opportunities for students to certify that they have employability skills in programs like linguistics, for example, I had the pleasure of taking a bachelor in linguistics, and I remember that my friends in sociology did have a co-op embedded. So it's interesting to see these two programs that were within the same faculty, but had a very, very different approach on how they were helping students achieve those learning outcomes. But now that we're looking at university degrees also serving as a means to create employability skills so that students can get into jobs, well, that's where we can leverage OERs, take these employability skills, look at them intentionally and see, well, what are we looking to evaluate? Where can we bridge these skills that students are already earning in XYZ bachelor degrees and ensuring that those employability skills are captured and translated to real life opportunities in industry as well. I don't know if there's any follow-ups to that. Thank you, Miriam. Really appreciate all the great questions. It's really nice when you have a really engaged group right from the beginning of the question period.
That's it from the Q&A chat. So I don't know if anyone else wants to take themselves off mute and ask any more questions, but we do have a couple minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Taylor. The floor is yours. Whoever wants to jump right in, either in the chat or feel free to unmute your mic. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, wherever you may be, whether it's the afternoon, the morning, or the evening for you. Really appreciate everyone's time for being here. And like I mentioned before, feel free to connect with me either on LinkedIn or by email. I'd be happy to continue this conversation as well. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.